Hey, welcome to 8.5, 8.6 video lecture notes part 3. This is the final video lecture for these lessons. So make sure that you are writing these things down. You're taking good detailed notes. You're answering your learning objective questions, and you're reviewing these things at home when you get a chance. Some things that we're going to be looking at are going to be the key issues facing modern America and contemporary America. So those are going to be some things that we will be addressing in this lesson. So with that being said, let's move over to our learning objectives for this lesson. And there are 7 of them. Explain the many problems with immigration in the United States. Explain the economic disparity in the United States. Describe Barack Obama's presidency and some of the things he dealt with. Explain the election of Donald J. Trump. Explain how globalization has taken over in much of the world and its impact on the United States. What are some of the ways the U.S. has fought back to become more competitive in terms of education? And what has been the effect of both parents working in the United States? So these are going to be some things that you're going to want to sort of think about while you're going through this lesson. And then at the end, make sure that you have answered these questions. Again, this is your roadmap to the lesson and being able to make sure that you know the material. So with that being said, let's start on our first topic, which is going to be immigration. One of the greatest reasons for racial and cultural diversity in the United States is immigration today. In recent decades, more and more immigrants have come from Latin America. And if you don't know where Latin America is, just to clarify this, Latin America includes, of course, all of Central America and all of South America. So please make sure you know that in case you didn't know. Okay, so while there are many people who immigrate to the United States legally each year, there's a growing number of people who are coming here illegally, and they're coming mainly across the southern border. As a result, the U.S. Hispanic population has grown tremendously in recent decades. So we're seeing an explosion of people crossing that southern border, coming from Latin America into the United States. One of the effects of this increase has been a controversial acceptance of bilingualism. And bilingualism, of course, means that you can speak more than one language. And as a number of people in the U.S. who speak Spanish as a first language grows, more and more states and government institutions are beginning to communicate in Spanish as well as English. Even in public schools, there is some emphasis on bilingual education. Again, this was first mandated by Congress in 1968. This practice is of providing students with access to public education taught in their own language. Some have argued that such practices are destructive because they hinder newcomers to the United States from learning English and serve to divide rather than unite people in U.S. proponents or in the U.S. U.S. proponents are going to point out that it enables immigrants to learn more easily and maintain their cultural identity. They also argue that because the United States has no official language, there is no reason why education and public information should not be offered in other languages as well as English. So you can see how this is a big controversy. And I think we've even talked about this before, even when we were talking about the immigration movements in the late 1800s and mid 1800s, how, people need to assimilate, and remember that word assimilate. They need to adapt and become part of, and of course this has been an ongoing argument for a long time here in the United States. Because many immigrants, though, are entering here illegally, some citizens want existing immigration laws strictly enforced and illegal immigration halted. These advocates, or people who support this position, point out that the millions of illegal immigrants who live in the United States cause a drain on the nation's healthcare system and public services without contributing enough taxes to cover the cost. And that's a big argument right now if you've been paying attention to the news. But critics of this position are going to point out that the vast majority of illegal immigrants are decent, hardworking people who just want a better way of life. They also are going to claim that many of these immigrants are necessary to sustain the nation's economy because they do many of the menial tasks and manual labor jobs that U.S. citizens will not do. And of course, this has been an ongoing thing right now playing out in the news with illegal immigration. You might want to pay attention to it if you haven't watched the news lately. When they start talking about immigration, you'll see all these points sort of brought out, talking points both ways. So pay attention to that. Check it out if you haven't paid attention to the news recently. Our next topic is going to be on economic disparity. And when we talk about economic disparity, it means the difference between rich and poor and how there is a big margin between rich and poor. But economic disparity refers to the differences in income and assets that exist when comparing individuals and or different populations within a society. And that's the textbook definition of it. But it is also important to remember that compared to the rest of the world, just about every U.S. citizen compares favorably on an economic basis. However, within the United States, there is a great deal of disparity. The bulk of the nation's wealth is in the hands of a relatively small group of people, or a small percentage of U.S. citizens. On average, white U.S. citizens tend to do better economically than minority citizens. Now, due to urban flight, if you don't know the definition of that, is a trend in which the middle-class citizens are leaving cities and moving to the suburbs. That's called urban flight. The problem with this is that the inner cities are going to tend to be economically worse off than the people that are living in the suburbs. So urban flight plays a huge role in that. So how to deal with the reality of economic disparity is often an issue in many political debates, and you're hearing that play out right now in the news as well. Conservative politicians tend to advocate less governmental control, and we've talked about the differences between conservatives and liberals and so on. So again, conservatives mainly believe less government control, whereas liberals believe in more governmental control and the government should have a bigger role. But anyway, these conservatives believe that the government should simply provide equal opportunity for all citizens to pursue success without hindering the process with high taxes or excessive regulation. By contrast, liberals, on the other hand, believe that it's up to the government to get involved, that the government should have higher taxes for raising revenue. Then that capital can be pumped into governmental programs designed to help those who are economically disadvantaged. So again, sort of breaking down economic disparity in the U.S. during this period, all of these things true. Pay attention again to the news. You'll see some of these things playing out right now. With that being said, let's move on to our next topic, which is going to be Barack Obama. Now, we just got through talking about George Bush and his presidency and the war on terror, and then some of the things that went on during his presidency. Now we're going to look at some of the things that Barack Obama is going to deal with, and I've listed a few of those things on this slide: the real estate crisis, the foreclosures that are going to go on, the stimulus plan, and taxes under Obama. So let's look at Barack Obama real quickly. The election of 2008 is when Barack Obama is going to become president. It's another historical presidential campaign. George Bush had served 2 terms, and he couldn't run for re-election. Several Republicans are going to try to win the nomination in 2008, but the party eventually is going to nominate John McCain as the Republican candidate. John McCain was an experienced senator from Arizona. McCain then made history when he became the first Republican to choose a woman to run as his vice presidential running mate, and that would be Alaska's Governor Sarah Palin. The Democrats are going to nominate a young Illinois senator named Barack Obama. Most experts thought that the Democrats would nominate former First Lady and current New York Senator Hillary Clinton, and that tended out to be a pretty good fight between Obama and Clinton during this election. Obama's going to run a masterful campaign, however, and he's going to defeat Clinton to become the Democratic candidate. 2 months later, Obama would defeat McCain to become the first African American president in U.S. history. Barack Obama would come into office dealing with a lot of things, but probably the one that's going to be that's really going to stick with him is going to be the real estate crisis. President Obama is going to enter the White House during a challenging economic time. During the 1990s, in his first few years of the 20th century, banks and other lenders are going to have to greatly relax lending standards in order to finance homes. So they were sort of, giving people loans that probably really didn't deserve them. They were giving them to people that had very low standards as far as their financial background. So these lower standards meant that more people qualified for loans to purchase homes. As more people bought homes, the real estate market began to explode and houses were going up left and right. Construction is going to increase, which is really going to impact the economy. But many U.S. citizens found employment in industries connected to the booming housing market. So a lot of people began to work in the housing market. Just think about all the things that go into actually building a house. And you can understand how, with all these houses being put up, how many jobs are going to be created because of all these houses being built. But unfortunately, all this is going to come to a screeching halt. Many of these loans were ballooning mortgages. People who had little money for down payments and normally could not have afforded a monthly mortgage accepted lending terms that allowed them to pay a low monthly payment for a set number of years, with the understanding that the payment would balloon to a higher rate when the period expired. So they might have started off with a very low interest rate, but that payment would possibly change after 5 years is what this means. These balloon mortgages are going to be one of the leading causes of this real estate crisis. As the economy began to contract, people began losing jobs. Unemployment coupled with ballooning mortgage payments meant that many homeowners could no longer make their monthly payments on their house. So we saw a record number of people go into what we call foreclosure. And the definition for foreclosure, if you don't know what that is when people lose their homes to lenders because they could no longer pay back their loans. Foreclosed homes are created a surplus of houses on the market. Real estate prices are going to drop because you've got a flood of homes, just like when we talk about supply and demand. And when we talked about, growing too many crops, we've discussed before, same thing's really sort of playing out here with houses. So there's going to be a surplus of houses on the market. Real estate prices are going to drop drastically, and a real estate crisis is going to occur. Construction is going to halt, and a lot of these jobs that people got in construction are going to be out of jobs. Many homeowners are going to find themselves upside down in their mortgages, owing their lender more money than their house was worth because the price of houses dropped. And initially they were high, and now they've dropped, and now they're upside down, meaning that they still owe more money than what the actual house is worth at that point. Thousands of people whose livelihood depended on real estate found themselves unemployed or their businesses failing. So that was one of the things that Barack Obama dealt with. One way that he's going to try to deal with this economic crisis is the stimulus plan, which I have up here on the slide. Obama's first strategy to deal with the economic crisis involved passing something called a stimulus package. It pumped large sums of federal money into the economy with the goal of creating jobs. The plan also provided billions of dollars to save several key businesses from going bankrupt, some of these even banks. It also helped prevent the U.S. auto industry from going under, which was in a very bad shape during this period. But more than 3 years into Obama's tenure, unemployment had continued to rise, the real estate market continued to flounder, businesses still weren't expanding, and it appeared to most citizens that Obama's stimulus package and stimulus plan had failed. Next thing we're going to look at is the taxes under Obama. Taxes always are controversial and they're always going to remain a key area for debate. But President Obama and others argued that tax cuts passed under President Bush to aid businesses should be ended. The president felt that these tax cuts gave too many advantages to big corporations and the wealthiest Americans, which you hear often if you've watched anything with the elections. Obama also supported raising the tax rate on wealthier citizens, arguing that millionaires and billionaires should pay their fair share. Republicans, though, are going to go against Obama's policies. They're going to argue that ending those Bush tax cuts, which Bush put into place for the wealthy and for corporations, would take away more money from business owners at the very time that businesses needed money to expand and create jobs. They're also going to point out that the nation's wealthiest citizens already paid the vast majority of taxes, and that they were also the people who tended to own businesses and employ workers. So naturally, it's the rich that give people jobs, and that's what the Republicans are arguing in this case. And if you take away and make them pay more taxes, then they're not going to be able to hire and work their businesses in order to make the economy more prosperous. The Republicans are going to argue that forcing them to pay more in taxes would only discourage them from hiring people, producing goods, and pumping money into the economy. Okay, so those are some things about Barack Obama's presidency. Make sure you get those down. And we're going to look next at a guy who's in office now, and that is going to be President Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump is the 45th and current president of the United States. And before entering politics, if you didn't know this, he was a businessman and television personality. He hosted a reality show known as The Apprentice, and The Apprentice ran from 2004 to 2015. Trump's going to win the general election on November 8th, 2016. And it's considered to be a surprise victory against his Democratic opponent, which was former Secretary of State and First Lady Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is the oldest person to assume the presidency. He is the first president without prior military or government service, and he was elected although he did not win the national popular vote. So Donald Trump, much like George Bush, is going to win the Electoral College, but he would not win the popular vote. And of course, if you want to know more about Donald Trump, all you have to do today is turn on the news. You can see pretty much what's going on with his presidency and some of the things that are happening with his administration. One last thing we're going to look at is going to be globalization. Globalization, the main things I want you to know are due to technology and economic ties today. The world is more connected than ever before. You guys know that with all the computers and all the things that we have going on today. How there are things going on here in the United States which can affect and impact things that are going on in another part of the world. So we're all sort of tied together now, and it's mainly due to technology. Globalization is going to result into a worldwide economy and communications that link the world together. So again, we're more of a worldwide economy than we've ever been before. But what threatens the security or economic stability of one nation is going to quickly impact others as well. And we've seen that play out before when we've talked about World War One, when we've talked about World War II, when we've talked about all these other economic crises. These things sort of reverberate or spread outwardly to other parts of the world. As a result, nations like the United States have a vested interest not only in their own security and stability, but in the security and stability of countries around the world. So, and we use that a lot of times to justify going into other places and sort of flexing our muscle if we need be. One of the other things that plays a prominent role now in economic globalization was the emergence of the European Union, also known as the EU. The EU is an economic entity consisting of 27 European nations. The EU unites these nations economically and uses the euro as a common currency. So they use, instead of dollar bills, they use something called the euro. In recent years, the EU has faced problems as several member countries have built up massive national debts. A few of these countries have even come close to going bankrupt. Such instability can have drastic effects not only in Europe, but across the globe. One of those countries being Great Britain, who threatened to leave the EU. You might have seen it. It's called Brexit on the news. Britain has often talked about leaving the EU and so on. So globalization, definitely a huge thing going on right now. Really shows how we're all interconnected. Technology played a major role in that interconnection, and it shows that you have repercussions for what happens in one country can definitely impact what happens in another. And I tried to show this on some of these pictures that we've got up here. Of course, NAFTA was one thing that we've talked about. Remember with Bill Clinton, the European Union, which would be right here. And then this shows you some of the major corporations that are scattered all throughout the world and how they're interconnected with how the United States is actually interconnected with some of these other places. So, what is globalization? Again, the expansion of worldwide trading networks. We talked about the European Union. Remember, it's between 27 European nations. It's an economic tie or economic alliance between 27 European nations. It promotes cooperation, democracy, and trade among those 27 European nations. We've discussed the North American Free Trade Agreement when we talked about Bill Clinton. Again, this agreement was set up to increase trade by eliminating trade barriers between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and it would lower tariffs around the world if we did that. Some of the results of globalization, again, it led to greater competition. It led to outsourcing of jobs to foreign markets, which it's being addressed right now if you've been paying attention to the news as well. But it also led to a growth in technologies such as cell phone and computers. These things are going to bring changes to society, to privacy laws, which if you paid attention with Google and Alexa and the privacy issues between these cameras and these smart home devices that we have today. And then, of course, the communications network. So all of these things were results of globalization. Now, how is America being competitive? And there are a couple of ways that the United States has sort of fought back to try to be competitive with other nations. But there are concerns that were raised about how well the American system worked. One of the things that George Bush put into place is something called No Child Left Behind, which was, put in place to make sure that everybody was teaching pretty much the same thing. And this is when we start to see a lot of these standardized tests, which we so hate. But these tests, again, are trying to measure to see if our students are meeting academic proficiency. The other thing that went on during the 80s, 90s, and 2000, you saw more and more two-parent homes with both parents working, and this is gonna cause problems too, because there's going to be a growing demand for daycares, because it used to be that kids stayed home with their mom, or when they came home from school they stayed home with their mom. But if mom's at work, naturally they can't stay with their mom. So we saw daycares start to grow in the demand for those daycares, and then of course kids, because parents are both working, less time to actually, maybe make a meal. Kids being unsupervised, it's led to them relying on fast food. And of course, you eat a lot of fast food, you end up with problems, health concerns, obesity. All of those are issues that can happen. So, that being said, that's going to do it. Let's look one more time at our learning objectives for part 3. Make sure that you have addressed and answered these learning objectives, and check your notes once you're done. And that's going to do it for Standard 8. We are done. So start preparing, getting yourself ready for your next test. Go back and you can start reviewing for EOC. We're going to start that real soon. And hopefully you've got all the material you need. If you need to go back and watch any of these videos, please make sure you do that. I think that would help and be a good way to review. So with that being said, adios.